Well, I want to say welcome to you all this morning to the Reengage Strategies for Reconnecting with Older and Offline Members. We are excited to have you all this morning. We at Oklahoma Pastor Renewal, helping pastors.com, want to be able to help bring some resources to you to help you as you minister and you reach the community around you. Today, we have four panelists who are guests, and we're excited to have them this morning. Guys that are seasoned veterans. They have served in smaller in attendance churches. They've served in rural communities, and they've been leading well. I want to introduce those guys really quick to you after I give a brief introduction of what Pastors Helping Pastors and Oklahoma Pastor Renewal is all about. We exist as a ministry of pastors to help pastors by bringing resources and by bringing ministry helps and aids in community. You can find more information about us at pastorshelpingpastors.com. This webinar is sponsored by the Oklahoma Baptist University Hobbs College of Theology and Ministry. Our good friends over there always willing to sponsor everything that we do because they believe in creating men and women who are disciples, and they want to reach people for Jesus, which is our goal as well. So our panelists today with us this morning, I'll start with our local guys, and then we'll go out from there. Bryan Laramore, who is First Baptist Church of Cherokee. Bryan is married and been in Cherokee now 6 months almost. He served almost 11 years in Ames at Ames Baptist Church, or First Baptist Church of Ames. Which was it, Bryan?
We called it Ames Baptist Church.
Ames Baptist. Ames is a community of about 200 people. So if you are familiar with Oklahoma and Northwest Oklahoma, you know that Ames is a thriving metropolis of 200, depending on the day. But
we called it a micro village.
Micro village. I like that. And then we have Dr. Todd Littleton, but everybody just calls him Todd. Todd has served 26 years faithfully at Snow Hill Baptist Church in Tuttle, Oklahoma. Tuttle being a community of a little over 8,500 people, for a school in Oklahoma, if you're familiar with that. But he has served faithfully at his church. He is an author. He is a blogger. He is a podcaster. He's a husband. He is a father, and he's a grandfather. And that's what he's probably most proud about. But he is a wonderful friend of not only Oklahoma Pastor Renewal, but many pastors around the state and the country. So we're grateful to have you, Todd. Dr. Joe Ligon, who we'll just refer to as Joe because that's what everybody knows him as. Joe is the Senior Associate Executive Director for Oklahoma Baptists. Joe has been serving in that role about a year now. Joe is a wonderful pastor, friend, mentor to many, jokester, and he loves Jesus. He loves his family, and he loves the church. Joe served faithfully for 20 plus years at First Baptist Church of Marlow after a illustrious career. Can we use that word, illustrious, I guess, as a school administrator? But Dr. Ligon served faithfully for 20 plus years at First Baptist Marlow. Out of that ministry, they planted churches in Phoenix, in Duncan, in Elgin. The church really multiplied by adding disciples daily, and he is a friend to many, and we're grateful to have him this morning. And then last but certainly not least, a new friend to our ministry, Matt Henslee. Matt Henslee, most of you guys know or familiar. He is a pastor at Mayhill Baptist Church in Mayhill, New Mexico. He explained to me just a minute ago, they are not incorporated, so they don't have a population, but his guess is around 40, 42 if the dogs get out. But he has been in Mayhill since 2017. He is a former editor for Lifeway Pastors, Facts and Trends with Lifeway. He is also writes on his blog. He is a preacher, pastor, a husband, and faithful father. He is the author of books on revitalization, and as well as finishing his doctorate ministry in church revitalization at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Guys, we are so excited to have you this morning. I want to say welcome to all of you out there that are watching this webinar. And I would say that the chat window is open, and I will be administering that this morning. So if you are out there in the webinar space you can send some chat messages up and we will answer some of those questions. We'll curate some questions from there. But I'm going to start us off with a word of prayer, and then we will jump in. Father in heaven, we are thankful and we are grateful this morning that we can come together bringing a resource, hopefully a help as we minister to our communities. As many of us have reopened and are in the process of reopening, God, there are many people who are disconnected. They've not been connected for quite some time through the community. And we pray, Father, that you would give us wisdom and you give us the words to say and some helps for men and women out there that are trying to reach and minister to those that are offline, and for those that may be older, those that are disconnected. So God, I pray for each one of these men this morning, and I thank you for them in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, guys. So let's just kick off with the first question. And I'm going to pull that up. I would have had that open, you'd think. So first question, let me just hit you with, how do you effectively engage offline members? So that's kind of open to all of you guys to answer. Let's talk about that. How can we effectively engage members of our churches, whether they're senior adults or they're just offline completely? As one guy in my church says, I'm not inviting the internets to my house. How do we engage with those folks effectively and efficiently as we're trying to navigate through our reopening?
Well, I would say that, I think one of the things that we know is that in a smaller setting, you have the advantage of really knowing your people and what they're comfortable with. Probably, I would assume more so than if you were in a more wide out, spread out setting. And so that folks are comfortable or not comfortable with you coming and visiting on their porch or having screen through meetings. I've prayed with a guy who's actively in the process of passing away to go to be the Lord, and met at his back window and stood on a ladder and talked through the screen, and he was okay with that. One of the things that we've done here, and this kind of came by way of a deacon, so the setting that you're in may be just dependent upon what you have access to, but we did and are doing what we call, hey, we want to meet with you deliveries, and meat is MEAT. And so we have a local cattle guy who does, he butchers his cows and gives that meat away. And so obviously your setting would dictate what you can do there. And we just come by and say, we want to meet with you. And we have gloves and masks on right now. And even though in Alfalfa County where we are, we're in a bubble, and we have one active case, or have had one active case, of a guy that we don't even think lives here. So we're kind of in a bubble, unique. So obviously your context would dictate this, but just having that the church hadn't forgotten you. We're very progressive. We try to move forward, but we want to be sensitive to those that are at home. And so we kind of have just found unique ways, kind of on a one-on-one, to draw those folks in who we know aren't really dialed in, here. That's just kind of one thing that we've attempted to do to keep connected.
All right, cool. One of the other guys, why don't you jump in and share with us?
With our church, we run about 120, 130 or so, and maybe half have access to the internets, as you said, Chris. And so we obviously can engage with them significantly easier right now, through email, through messages, and so forth. But part of what we have done for them is kind of leveraging those that have to help those that do not. And so we send out a 3 times weekly devotional for our folks based on just one word. It's not the most robust theology that I've ever written in my life. It's about as long as the book you mentioned. You called it a book. I call it a booklet. But we send out that to our folks. But part of it at the end have 4 simple things that they can do to either live out that word that I send out or check on somebody and so forth. And so our members have been very forward thinking and reaching to those that don't have Wi-Fi, don't have the internet, don't get those emails. And then we also make those available for those that would like to have them. We're not mailing out, 50 or 60 of those every single Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but we collect them all. And those that want it, we give that to them. And that was our way of sort of in between Sunday school. We don't have the ability to do the Zoom Sunday school for all of our folks. And so that was one way to still have some teaching and discipleship throughout the week in them, that with that fellowship side of it, of them calling other members and so forth. And so that's been the most helpful that we've seen, is kind of leveraging those that have it. to purposefully reach out to those that don't. And so they're calling, checking on them. Can we go get groceries? Because usually those that don't have the Wi-Fi, or those that maybe don't feel comfortable coming to church, or going into the big town 40 miles away to Walmart. So
Gotcha.
we, anytime somebody's going, it's like, hey, if you know anybody that needs a few things right now, that was mostly toilet paper, we would go and pick that up for them.
That was like gold chips. It sure has been. So
I offered to be paid in it. Like, just give me toilet paper. I don't need money right now. Give us some toilet paper.
That's right. That's right. So Todd, let me ask you, in your setting there, you're close enough to a metro area in comparison to Matt or Bryan and myself. You're a 20-minute, 25-minute drive, depending on which way you go, into Oklahoma City. How have you seen some creative ways of engaging senior adults in your or those that are just disconnected in your congregation, given that you're in a little bit of a different area than us?
Yeah, I think probably it's a deceiving. We have been the largest town our size without really good internet service until the city started installing fiber about a year ago. So even those of us who, like in my office, I've got greater access. Our particular service wouldn't allow folks to do Zoom. If I've got a young fellow who's in sales in oil field work, and he has a Skype call about every day, and he says he's not yet hooked up on the fiber, and he says I can last maybe 10 minutes and it's garbled and I don't get anybody. It's really horrible. It's hard to do. So really we have been in that regard in terms of percentages. We've probably been in a similar setting simply because our older folks are immigrants to technology, and it's just totally not something that is their first line of thinking. I had one of our older deacons, he's in his 80s. I talked to him the other day when he stopped by. We opened up the office for now the second week, and he says, "Well, I've been calling. Charles Stanley's been my the last 7 or 8 weeks." He said, "I haven't seen or heard anything." Well, he's not got internet. He's not got that kind of thing. And so the tact we've taken is really to go old school with those. And that is, I didn't grow up in the era of doing church with technology and internet. Gore hadn't invented the internet yet. And so we are accustomed to really having to depend on, like old school communication. So right off the bat, knowing that we had a good number of our folks who wouldn't be savvy and wouldn't be connected by technology, it was insistence on, so here I'll send out a little note, phone call, try to find ways to get that information out to say, now, imagine yourself sitting in worship on a Sunday morning. You who are regularly attend know who sits in front of you, behind you, to your right, and to your left. And so I'd take a day and say, now, pray and contact the persons who sit in front of you, and then pray and contact the persons who sit behind you, and then pray and So it was really going kind of, back to some old habits that we've kind of got admittedly lazy with, that there are means. And then the other thing that we younger people aren't aware of, that there's this art form called letter writing. And
what is that? Explain that to me.
And so, I had a young fellow that I know who served a church in California, and it was actually his habit to just scratch out a note. And I'm like, dude, you're a master of tech. You got text messaging. You all have the fastest internet, out there on the coast. I mean, nope. He said nobody realizes how much a person appreciates a handwritten letter. It is invested with your time. Even though it takes time to type out an email, there's something different about taking out a pen and a piece of paper and licking a stamp. And well, you don't have to lick them anymore, but put them on an envelope. And so we actually, for that segment of our group, we started trying to reach out to folks who were kind of the cog in a sphere of people, and use their sphere of influence and say, okay, help us out, and be sure you're calling those people or sending out send a note. And then, ironically enough, a lot of these folks who have technology have a smartphone. They just don't know all of its power and capabilities, but they do have children and grandchildren. So we would reach out to their children and grandchildren and say, "Hey, can you go over to grandma's or can you go to your parents? Can you help them hook up their smart TV and show them how to access this? Can you show them their smartphone?" So I've got a lady who's in her 80s, and it's the greatest. She thinks my Facebook Live corny 5-minute in the evening check-ins are the best thing since bread. And she looks for them every single day, and has asked, "Are you going to keep doing this?" And I mean, she's quickly saying, "Hi, Todd," and she just lives a mile from my office. But for her, it's a discovery. So we've also tried to help some discover that you have these capabilities right there. You just didn't know you did.
Sure.
And I mean, it's like a kid who broke out his first package of Legos. This is fantastic. So those have been means to kind of, make some connections.
All right, Joe, I'm going to say something, and I hope I don't offend you, but this is the longest I've ever known you to be quiet.
Man, I'm learning. I guess we're going to talk about senior adults. I get to be the senior adult guy.
Listen, guys,
I don't know why I got asked to be a part of this.
When we asked Joe to be a part, the reason I said, "Joe, I need you to lead this. I need you to keep us on task. I need you to be the guy that's flowing." Joe is, he does that well. And so he's been sitting back listening, and I appreciate that, Joe, listening to these pastors. Let me ask you, you come from a different angle, obviously, being in an entity and being you've been probably talking to multiple pastors in our state. Maybe there's some things that other guys are doing that we haven't talked about that you could bring to the table. Help us out, because I definitely think what has been said is wonderful, and we need to keep doing that. But maybe there's something else out there you know about. So fire away, buddy.
Well, what these three guys have talked about really, I think, covers the gamut as far as I'm hearing. Although I've been at the state office now for a little over a year, I still have a lot of pastor in my heart. One thing I would want to remind people of is that your senior adults, particularly if you're in a small town, your senior adults are probably better connected with each other than any other generation that you have in your church. Mm-hmm. We think the young ones with the smartphones and social media are all connected up. And they are to a certain extent, but I promise you, those senior adults are on the phone with their friends and their Sunday school members, and they're engaged with each other. They're watching out after each other. And so we don't want to neglect that communication opportunity. If we can get into that group, we can get a word out to a lot of our senior adults in a hurry just by the communication systems that they have in place. The other thing I think is important to remember is that, and this will be offensive to some, so if I offend you, you have to apologize to me. Church for our senior adults in our small towns, church is more than church. It is their socialization.
Right.
And so we, as pastors, we've really got to remember that not only are our senior adults missing church, but in many ways, they're missing the socialization aspect that they so look forward to on Wednesday nights or Sunday mornings or Sunday nights, if you still do that. Yeah. And that increases the necessity of church leadership finding ways to connect to our senior adults. And some of that social media, some of that's internet. Todd, you're spot on. A handwritten note or even a form letter that we can mail out to all of our folk. As much as young guys probably throw it in the trash and don't look at it, senior adults are going to read that thing and maybe read it more than once. So use every aspect of communication you have available to stay in contact with your senior adults. Bryan, I love the idea of going to their homes and even climbing up a ladder and talking to the screens. Although I'd want to make sure that they knew I was going to do that before my head just popped up.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way.
No, yeah, me too, Bryan. Me too. That's scary, everybody.
Suggestion, because some of those adults are packing, dude, and they'll shoot that.
They might have a hammer. They're going to start swinging. It's very true. So,
in what Joe was talking about, we saw in such a beautiful way, also a humorous way, the the social aspect of it, everybody has their pew, as we all know. And my dad, if you sat in his pew, he would tell you, you need to move over one. I've got my wife coming, or something like that. But we've been doing the drive-in, which has given our folks a chance to see. They can't necessarily talk, and certainly aren't outside, visiting with one another, hugging, that kind of thing, but they can see. But what we've noticed over 8 or 9 weeks now is they have their own pew, as we call it, out in the parking lot. And it's almost identical to where they're sitting in the sanctuary. And so it's like, this is this section of the sanctuary. They all kind of get there at the same time, and they park in that same spot every week. And then this is another so you're totally right. It is a chance for them to connect and have that community with one another.
Yeah.
So for sure.
And that's funny. I never really thought about, them having their own section in the drive-in service. So
it's amazing.
It is pretty but creatures of habit, we're all creatures of habit. And I think Joe hit on a very good point that, for a lot of our members, even for our young adults, but especially for our senior adults, this is community. And we have, multiple people in our church that are widows, that this is where they are able to meet and greet and spend time during the week with, their friends and one another and that sort of thing. So that's good. So let me ask you, because I don't know where you guys are at. We're not launching back until June 7th. I think Bryan is June 7th as well. Matt, you said you're outdoor some. Todd, or you're probably around June 7th. But a lot of guys have already started back. Some are just doing worship only. Some are doing different things. What about Sunday school? When do we think about, and how do we, begin bringing that back online? Because as Joe mentioned, that community is a very, very important thing for a lot of our senior adults, and especially, and their Sunday school class is a big deal. And I know that they maybe have been having phone contact Sunday school, but they long for that in person. So what are some suggestions on that? And then what are some ways we can ensure safety for those that may be nervous about that? Does that make sense? Joe, I'm going to ask you as the resident expert. Let's go ahead and start with you.
Well, I think at any level of opening the church back, whether it's for worship only or if it's for small groups, Sunday school, whatever you want to call it at your place, I think there are two issues that we really have to keep in mind. One of those is the safety of our people that are coming back to church. And as church leaders, we've got to keep that paramount and in front of us, that we're doing all that we can to protect the safety of those that are coming. The second issue, I honestly believe, is the reputation of the church in your community. Because think about that. If you start church back, and a lot of guys have, and I'm thrilled that they have, but let your church become a hot spot of infection, and that's gonna damage your reputation in that small community that you're in. If we're talking about small communities, small churches, and that will be difficult to overcome, because the non-church members in your community will always say, well, it was that First Baptist Church that started that back up. My grandma died. It's going to be really hard to overcome that. So those two, I didn't answer your question, Chris, but those two pieces, I think, are really important pieces of the puzzle, not only as we come back to worship, but also when we start adding small group or Sunday school.
No, that does answer it, because that's good. That's great thought, great advice. Guys?
I'll jump in. I think I just had a conversation with our custodian, and we were talking, and she said, kind of what areas do I need to get ready for that day? And I think she had in mind, what about the classrooms and that sort of thing that have lied dormant for now, 8-9 weeks. And I just told her, I think what we're going to have to do is, and this doesn't sound maybe like normal leadership, where you gather your staff or deacons or elders or however your polity works for you, and make the call. I think this is going to be a situation where actually we're going to have to learn from, in a dynamic sort of sense, what people's level of comfort's going to be. It's not really going to matter. So, reports I've heard of folks who've, begun services, anywhere from 13 to 30% of people have come. So if you think that's who's coming to your larger events like your worship, and you've got more space maybe to spread out and you can social distance, just imagine what the reticence will be if you're putting them in a 10 by 20 room with 25 people or 15 children, and mom and dad probably aren't going to be too fired up about that. So I think what our tack is going to be is get started with worship, and probably keep it the same scale we're doing live stream right now, just for the sake of brevity and not keeping people in as long as we normally would under previous circumstances. And then start trying to communicate and find out at what level are you going to feel comfortable bringing your children and adults. What's your comfort level of meeting for Bible study, given your location, the number of people in your class, and kind of respond accordingly. I know that everybody wants someone to make the call, but in this instance, I think it's going to be more how can we be responsive to this new dynamic where people are just not quite sure.
Yeah.
And I know there'll be some who are gung-ho and I don't need a mask, and that's fine. That's great. But they also need to be reminded that the mask isn't for their protection. The mask is for the other person's protection. And so I think it's also a theological teaching moment. I mean, both Paul and Peter give opportunity for us to remember that our first allegiance is to the other person. And that is actually a deference to the model of Christ. So if that's kind of what our concern is to be theological, we got to probably put that hat on before we think practically, and let that be our guide.
That's good. That's good.
For us, we're kicking back this Sunday. Our governor had we went from 100 to 50 to 10 to 5 in a week in terms of how many people could be together in a group. Now we have begun to open things back up. At first it was, I think the churches were at 10% and then everything else was 25. But a couple of days later, everybody was at 25%. So as far as Sunday school, if I could keep everybody in a room and not going into the only hallway that we have in passing back and forth, it might be a little different. The problem is there's no way to pull that off, and so we're going to give deference to whatever the percentage is. And right now we can have 65 people in our building at one time. And so that's all we can really have there. And so we've tossed around in the future, kind of what Todd was sharing about is what are they going to do? If, right now we've grown by about 10 to 20 people every week in the drive-in. We've had as many as 150, 160 out there. And I doubt that this Sunday, as we open back up, we have 160. Actually, I hope we don't, because we can't. But what we're doing is we're going to have a classic service at 9:30 a.m. for our older and vulnerable population, and then a modern service for younger families at 11 o'clock with a simultaneous drive-in outside and the live stream at home. So if they don't feel comfortable coming at all, we still have a few like that. Then they still have the live at home. If they don't feel comfortable coming inside, then we've got the drive-in out there. And then those that do, of course, we'll practice with the sanitation stations. We've got a bunch of masks that are available if they want them, if they need them. And in the offering, of course, we're not passing a plate. We don't have the Lord's Supper this week, but it'll be next week for us. And we've got the little individual crackers that taste terrible.
Yeah.
but it works right now. And so I have shared with pastors, if you haven't tried one of those, try it before, because your face is going to show exactly what it tastes like when you're sharing the Lord's Supper. So just prepare yourself, taste it beforehand. But so we'll have that next week. But so we're kind of phasing into it. What are they comfortable with? Because I've got some that I don't think they're going to leave their house until the rapture. And then I've got some that this whole thing is a hoax. We shouldn't have shut down. Why are we listening to and you're pastoring all of them with grace, humility, and learning from them, kind of getting their temperature. And so you know what you can do and what you should do, and then kind of balance that as Todd shared with what they're willing to do, and bring them in slowly and safely and so forth. And so that's been our model here.
That's good. Well, I want to take a second here to answer questions. We got a couple that have come through. One in particular from Tim Hare, and he asks, as churches are beginning to open up in various ways, should we encourage our senior adults to come, since many of them do not have access to technology, which is what we're talking about, or should we encourage them for the sake of their safety to remain at home? And again, I know that it's hard for us to answer that in Tim's context because we're not where Tim is, but maybe you can answer that in the context where you serve. Bryan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think here in Cherokee, we're in a unique place in that I actually haven't heard of even one of our older adults. I've kind of been holding back on this for the nature of this deal, but who aren't connected. And so I've been thinking in terms of at Ames, who are still very much in my heart, and I think that my heart for them is to do two things. One, to let them know that I trust your decision making because I believe that you trust my decision making. And so to not play hard and fast on what we recommend, but obviously to give clear, we want this for everybody. We want to return. We want safety. And so if you don't feel up to par, we don't want you to feel any shame or any of that negativity that unfortunately has come with those who want to sort of recluse and stay out during this time. And so I think here at Cherokee, what I would certainly done at Ames as well is to sort of default to their comfort level and then make arrangements on our end so that folks, if they want to come in, but they are under that, they're at risk, we want to make space for them. So it might open up a fellowship hall area the way that Ames was laid out. Our fellowship hall opened up into our sanctuary. And so being able to say this is a special place. And so I personally, my approach is not to say, hey, if you're 65 or older, we would like for you to stay home. Instead, is to say, what's best for you, but also take into consideration one another. And so if it is best for you to stay home, please do. If not, we'll do everything we can to accompany that. I've been asked everything from, hey, Pastor, are we going to temp check people at the door? Are we going to require face? I mean, as we all probably have. And it's just my approach. And maybe that's just a soft play way to go about it. But it certainly is to trust their decision making, as I hope that they obviously trust my decision making. It's kind of a middle road approach, I think.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Any other guys want to jump in on that on Tim's question, just as far as what or even what your plan may be, Todd?
I think we have, since we kind of collectively made the decision to stop in-person meeting even before the shelter at home in Oklahoma, the emphasis was on our at-risk folks. Mm-hmm. And that even though many wanted to go ahead and continue meeting, our decision was we want to take care of our folks and take care of each other.
That's good.
And so I suspect that theme has been played enough over the last 8 or 9 weeks that some, like Joe mentioned, will view this as a return to their, not just worship, but their social circles will probably come. But there are others who recognize that it took them a little bit. I had a few calls. Hey, now I kind of realize what's going on. My neurologist called or my doctor called, checked on me. And I think they'll make that call like Bryan was talking about. They'll kind of determine, self-police, if I could use that word. They'll self-discern, what might be in their best interest. And so I think for that, I was going to ask the two younger guys, don't you think that you'll probably have to, for a period, continue your live stream? In fact, I'm not sure live stream won't become just a permanent fixture.
It should.
Especially since we've got warnings that this returns in the fall, and we never know are restrictions or some level of restrictions going to be reinserted into our lives. And so, once you've got something started, if it's working, we actually started live streaming in December, mainly because our church is on a hill, and if we have snow and ice, nobody gets in the parking lot. Yeah. And all the warnings were, and the Farmer's Almanac said, and my persimmon tree said it was going to be ugly. So we just set it up, and we didn't make any big deal. We really didn't advertise it. We didn't tell our folks really even, unless we knew someone was going to have to be stuck at home. Well, winter wasn't what they said it was going to be. So we already had some of that ready. We just have decided that's probably going to be, at least going forward, part of what we do. And so I think, to Tim's question, would be, I might try to find a way, depending on his context, of course, who in the church could help someone, lend them an iPad or a tablet or a smartphone or something that could help them maybe get connected, or some way that they could continue to be involved in the intermittent ways that I think are going to be our reality going forward.
Hey, I would piggyback one thought. We had a family, a young couple actually, very mobile, very progressive, who have, I don't exactly know the relation that they have of this particular senior adult, but they literally go over every Sunday morning and get her. Their family, they're connected, so there's some obviously safety mitigated there, and they bring her over to her house and watch. And they've even echoed that we might just stay home, even though they can return on the 7th, and just stay home so that she can come over. So even if it's not lending something, it's lending your living room space. And I think that's worked for them. I've only heard that once, but I thought that was a really good idea. And it was just literally on their own. And they were some of our newest members to our church. They weren't longtime Christians who think this way. So I was really encouraged by that, just to kind of play off what Todd was saying.
That's good. That's good. Okay, so I'm going to ask a question that came in to us from Ron Forrest. And I think Ron is at Chelsea Baptist Church, First Baptist Chelsea. Question, and I want to direct this to Matt first. He asks, what are some ways that we can connect with those people we have engaged in our church with through the FM radio broadcast, live stream, etc.? You've been doing outdoor stuff, right? Like you said. And so
having a sunburn every week.
So how are you planning, or what are some strategies you've got to help connect those folks?
I want to share one thing we're doing poorly. And I say that because, pastors, we sometimes have that we've got to save the world mentality, and we end up doing everything. I did not do well in bringing people into this one particular thing that we did. So to answer the live thing, I realized that we had people that we could call as prospects. These would be people that were in our community. Then we had people in Ohio that were listening in, that were related to some of the members of our church. And it was like you would see this little conversation going on between them as they're worshiping. Now we run the Premiere or whatever, because we don't have the Wi-Fi capabilities to run live stream as the name implies. So we run it, record it, do the Premiere, and then on Sunday afternoon or Monday, I begin following up with those that have checked in, those especially as you kind of look on Facebook that might be in the area. I send them some information on the church. What I wish we had done, and I'm trying to get done, is what we didn't do well, is giving that opportunity to serve to somebody in our church. I was just kind of taking it on myself. So I've just preached, I've recorded it, I go out and preach, get my sunburn, and then I'm going afternoon on Sunday trying to follow up with all of these people, when that could be done while the service is happening with members of our church. So that's just an idea to throw out. One of these three probably have done something similar, so I'll defer to them. That's not what we've done well. So I do it all, and I'm not proud of that. As far as drive-in, we use the FM transmitter and speakers. We're in an area where we're at about, I think, 7,000 feet up in the air, so it's usually a little bit cooler. We're also moving into our summer, which kind of lasts right now until June, where it'll get to about 80 degrees. And I know that's not crazy, but when you're used to a high of 50, for me, this is still heavenly, because I'm from Dallas in San Antonio area. So I'm used to 1,000% humidity and dying every summer. So this is still heavenly for me, but for them, I mean, I can see they're all red in the face and everything. I'm like, roll up your windows and turn on the car, like run the air conditioning, man. Like, you don't have to suffer for Jesus out here. Come on. Let me suffer, y'all enjoy this. And so we're at the point now where we've got the FM, so they can roll up the window, listen on the radio. Back home, we had 99.5 The Wolf. So we've, because we're Baptist, it's 99.5 The Lamb. And so they tune in, and or they can roll the window down and, and they can listen and see and get the breeze and all of that. So those have been the two ways that we've done it. The live stream or Premiere, we've recorded it beforehand. It uploads and is usually there in about 2.5 months later. And then we have the drive-in, both windows up, 99.5 or windows down, they can just listen from the speakers.
Okay, Joe, I'm going to ask you this question because for you, from your experience serving in Marlow, I know you guys broadcasted locally, maybe on radio or on TV. Isn't that correct?
In Marlow, we were on the radio. I'm the intern at First Lawton, and I'm on TV because now I have a face for TV preaching. How about that?
Yeah, you know, I was told I had the face for radio one time. I don't know what they meant by that, but anyhow, Joe, how are you able to connect? Because you did this, even though there was no social distancing back when you were at Marlow, obviously, which is just fairly recent, but now at Lawton and doing TV on TV. But how are you connecting those people that were not bottoms in the seats, right? So how did you help engage and connect those? Because maybe what you were doing then, because your church clearly grew through that time, what were you doing that worked?
Well, it's a great question. Marlow, being a small community, 4,500, 5,000 people on a good day, the longer I pastored there, the more I was more than, that didn't work out. I wasn't just the pastor at First Baptist Marlow anymore. I was a community pastor.
Yeah.
So we never could tell who was listening on the radio until I got out in the community at the convenience store or at the local cafe, and people would say something to me about something I said during the sermon. And oftentimes it would be people like, "Oh no, you're not listening to First Baptist Marlow. You're not listening to me." But they would quote something that I said, and usually it wasn't the better things I said. It was some, how we are. But just for us and the radio in Marlow, it was that kind of connection that allowed us to figure out who was listening in, and they felt that to be a safe way to be a part of First Baptist Marlow, in much the same way that I think we're seeing live stream people join us in kind of a safe and anonymous way to see what's going on in our churches. Yeah. And so the in-person thing was critical at Marlow just because of the size of the community and my being there long enough. Everybody kind of knew I was pastor of the church and would say something to me about a radio broadcast.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move into another question that was asked by one of our attendees, and I'm going to throw him under the bus because he's a good friend, Mike Luster, who this topic and this webinar today is all Mike's fault. Mike asked in our last webinar for some out-of-the-box ideas for small groups other than meeting in their classroom, for Sunday school, for those that were older and offline, right? And so that's what curated this entire webinar. So he asks again, and Mike, we appreciate your question. Thanks for signing on and asking.
There's no pressure since the whole thing is built on this one question. Guys, we cannot drop the ball on this one.
Yeah, that's right. We'll blame, who can we blame? No, but really though, what are some out-of-the-box ideas? Because I think like we're trying to figure through how to do that here. Zoom, it's not working with my senior adults, right? And so what are some thoughts, guys?
Is it possible, most of our churches have fellowship halls. Is it possible to do Sunday school at some other time than Sunday morning and bring the group into the fellowship hall with someone responsible to make sure they're masked up, make sure they're social distancing, and yet in the same physical space together in a kind of a Sunday school environment?
That's why we asked you, Joe. There you go.
So
that's great. Yeah.
Sunday school doesn't have to be Sunday morning. Let's get out of that box. And I think the live stream things that we're doing, God forbid that we back up and stop that stuff. Yeah. We have got to move forward with that and continue to think outside of the box and how we do church and the things that we've learned in the past 2 months. Let's build on that and move forward so that we reach more and more people with the gospel.
Amen.
But what would be wrong with bringing a group of senior adults at 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon and making sure that they're socially distanced, as I said, mask up, and they're in the fellowship hall but they're together.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be quiet.
No, that's good. Hey, let me real quick, and then I'll go back to that question. I want to say this webinar obviously sponsored by Oklahoma Baptist University, Hobbs College of Theology and Ministry. Our good friend Matt Emerson, the dean over there, always great to sponsor and help us out. If you're looking for quality education for students in your ministry, at your church, or in your community, or you yourself are looking to further some of your education or finish your education, look them up on the web, okbu.edu. They are training pastors and leaders for tomorrow. They've also partnered with all 6 of our seminaries, and you can go from undergrad to MDiv in 5 years. So I want to say thank you to OBU Hobbs College of Theology and Ministry, and Dr. Matt Emerson for sponsoring this webinar. Okay, so Todd, going back to that, asking you, because Matt shared about how, they've got one hallway, okay? And so getting people in and out. I don't know what Snow Hill looks like, but give me some out-of-the-box thoughts on what you guys might be doing, to have Sunday school or whatever, small groups.
I'm probably just going to steal Joe.
Okay.
And because really, be frank with you, because we still don't yet have a good picture of what the response is going to be. I think the group that probably will initially be longing for that more than any other will actually be those senior adults. And so this is a fantastic idea. I've been trying to think some way, because Zoom won't work for that group. Facebook Live won't work for that group. And they want to be together. And we've got several spaces, different entrances, that sort of thing that we could set aside, find out, poll them what day works best for them. Do they want to go hit most of them? Well, many of them will hit the senior center, grab lunch. Maybe they can come after they've hit the senior center after lunch, and we can come hang out. I wouldn't be opposed, to providing lunch for them in that way, so long as we did it in a kind of
healthy,
safe environment, and practice the protocols that would be in keeping with their safety. But I think those are the sorts of things. Last night, our youth, and we looked for an FM transmitter. We looked for some of that stuff, but we couldn't reduplicate what we were doing outdoors that we were doing on live stream, and that was going to make it pretty tough, since we'd started the one without thinking about the other. But our young people had their Wednesday night thing for the first time outside on the parking lot. It was well responded to, social distanced. It looks great. And so I think probably those are going to be the creative things. We've got a little area down by the pond. I could set up folding chairs out under the trees if it's cool. And, I think Joe kind of probably lit the fuse on thinking otherly about what are some of the things available to you, given your building structure, given your surroundings. And if you don't have the space in your church, if we're going to push Joe's idea further, what about a city park, or maybe there's a community building, or maybe if you have a senior center where they gather in your small community, what about checking with them and seeing, would it be safe to come in and after they're finished or prior to their start, offer a Sunday school or a Bible study for that age group. And then you're actually taking church out away from the building. You're interfacing with the community, and you're likely to pick up a few people who, well, what's that all about? And so I think that probably is the I think Joe probably hit the home run. So Matt, you don't have to worry about it. Brian, you don't have to worry about it. I think Joe did it. He carried the weight for the entire Zoom meeting right here. Just in that answer. And done.
No.
Let's pray.
Matthew Rosenau put in a great idea over here on the chat. He just said, hey, we're small enough that he was wondering about adults meeting together in the auditorium for Sunday school. They're going to meet for worship in the auditorium, so why not an hour early for adult Sunday school? It's a great idea. I think that's something that works well. If it works for your context, then jump in and do it. I think what Joe is saying, and we would all agree with, is this is a perfect time to be able to go outside the box and do some different things. It doesn't mean what we've done previously is bad or that we have to stay with it. But it's better to do something or offer something right than nothing. Matt, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, this is a great chance where you can lead and offer some changes, and it's not blamed on this young guy just has all these great ideas. Put it all on the Rona, baby. And this is your chance. It's been offered up as a silver platter. And there's a lot of things that we do because that's the way we've always done it. That's everybody. That's our code word here. Like if they want to trigger Pastor Matt, well, that's not how we did it. That's always a thing, but we have a chance to graciously lead into maybe considering the way we used to do it wasn't best. We've had people that have talked about the drive-in thing. We've had more out here in the front of our church than we've ever had inside, minus one Sunday in the history of this church. And we've had people that, and it's somewhat scary and not very safe. Like I haven't been worried about anybody catching corona. I've been worried about these people that will literally stop on the highway. We're right on Highway 82. It's the only road that comes through here. They will stop and listen. They'll roll down their windows and they're listening. I'm like, come in before you just get flattened in front of us, because that's going to be memorable. And so please pull in off of the road. And so we've been having that, but we've had people that have watched online, of course, that we never would reach on Sunday morning here in the building. We've had people that have seen outside. We've got a couple that history with the church they vowed never to come in the doors of our church again. But every Sunday they go to our cafe, they get lunch, and they sit on their porch and listen to the service. And even recently they started honking when we had, because I hear this honk coming up from the hill above us, and I found out that was them. They're honking. And so they're part of it, though they've got some, things. We've been working on that, for 3 years. But
what a great opportunity to share for them to hear and share the gospel. We can pray for that couple to come to know Christ, and then for that to happen. And when we do gather together again to be able to baptize them, if the Lord so moves in their heart. But I think those are the things that we want to continue looking for the positive in this. Like Clark said here to all of us, Oklahoma weather is brutal, right? In the summer. Is hot. Now, Matt is, we're all jealous.
I'm in heaven.
That's right, 80 degrees. We're like, come on now. But it's hot. So we have to kind of think through some of that. And maybe that's just breaking it down during the week. I don't know. But,
thinking what we can do over what we can't. Because I do struggle with pessimism and some of that kind of stuff. So a lot of times that first couple of weeks, that's like, man, we can't do this. We can't do that. We can't do this. That was what I was thinking through. And I think it was Mark Dance, which is now one of you guys. Y'all brought him from Nashville all the way to Oklahoma. And he shared that with me about what can you do. And so we're looking for every area. And so, those that are talking about the heat, it might be, you can't be outside at 11 o'clock because it's 1,000 degrees, maybe moving the service up and having it at 8:30 or 9, where it might only be 500 degrees, but it's better, so we've tried to think at all times here, what can we do safely, and not focusing on what we can't. And because that's just opened our eyes to other opportunities we hadn't considered.
Personally, the one takeaway that I have above everything else, and I'm so excited that we finally get to lay to rest for at least a little while the phrase, just ask forgiveness later. Now, courtesy of Matt Henslee, we get just blame it on the Rona. That's my number one takeaway. 100%.
Hey, the coat rack I've been trying to get rid of for 5.5 years. It's gone.
Yeah, it might carry Rona. Send it out.
So great question coming from one of our attendees, Clark Fraley, who is in Edmond. Cotton Creek Baptist Church. Clark asks, so they've seen at least one salvation every Sunday. First of all, let's just stop and thank God for that. Amen to that, right? Amen. That's huge. And we, on all this craziness, let's not forget the gospel is good to save, right? And God desires for us to share the good news of the gospel and not be afraid. Praise God for that. So thank you for sharing that, Clark. What a great testimony. But he asked, what are we doing for baptisms? Super soakers? Drive-by buckets, right? We personally here at First Baptist Tennessee, we baptized a young lady who was on the schedule to be baptized right about the time this hit. And so we baptized her. It was her mom, her, myself, and our children's minister. And we sat in the sanctuary, we baptized her, and we showed that on the big screen, or not on the big screen, excuse me, on our live stream, pre-recorded video. But how are you guys handling baptism? So let's kind of think through that, because I think this is important.
We're probably the most boring, so I'll go ahead and get it out of the way. We've just delayed baptism and Lord's Supper until we can return. That's basically where we're at. So that's pretty straightforward.
All right. I don't think that's boring, Brian. I think there's some wisdom in that.
I'd say that's probably what we're going to do.
Go ahead, Todd.
I said I think that's probably what we will do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And counsel through those people that have made those decisions that, we're not delaying this because you're, and helping them to see this does not mean you're not saved, right?
Right.
It doesn't mean that your sanctification's on hold.
Which means you're disobedient. No, I'm joking.
But
Yeah.
I don't want to make light of that because, but there are people. One testimony from my good friend Luke Holmes, who's a part of Oklahoma Pastor Renewal on our board. He's at First Baptist Church Tishomingo, and one of the things that Luke did, they had a FM transmitter live worship service on Easter Sunday. Baptized a young lady, and he said what was super cool is they baptized her, and as she's coming up out of the water, people started honking their horns like it was. He said, I literally, he said, not only was I crying just like tears of joy, but excitement. He said, when they started honking their horns and flashing their lights, like the look on this young lady's face, and then everybody, like, what a celebration that was. So, I mean, if you're doing outdoor services still or able to, get a horse trough, right? Get a kiddie pool, whatever you got to do, and do that. Because Joe, I'm now as the senior associate executive director of Oklahoma Baptist. You're like the assistant pope of Oklahoma Baptist. Are those baptisms still real and legit if they're dunked in a tank?
Depends how long you hold them under.
Oh, okay. All right, good. I knew that you would have an answer for that. Okay.
We wait till they bubble.
Time on that. You got to hold them till they bubble. Don't let them up till they bubble.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
So we as soon as this happened, we froze all spending, and except for CP and the stuff, our missions, we started supporting a church planner like right when this is going on. So it's like, well, what about him? It's like, well, we might need to double what we give to him. But so we froze everything. Well, we had a young one get saved, a young lady, and so our like, well, how are we going to do that? And I said, well, we're going to rent a dunk booth. And she said, really? I said, no, we might want to be a little more normal because, I wanted to, but, kind of like the super soaker thing. But so we went down to Tractor Supply. It was one of the stores that were still open. And she got a, horse trough or whatever. And it showed up like the picture of it is great. I can't tell how big it is. And she thankfully didn't send me a picture of her sitting in it or something, but it came in and that thing was small and like super small. So it could handle maybe a teen and below, but we had a couple of Sundays later, an older gentleman get saved, which we, obviously praise the Lord for that. And I'm kind of picturing that thing in my eye. And I said, we're going to have to baptize his legs first, then take him out, then do his body. And but now we're going into the building. And so he's going to be our first thing happening when we're back together. We'll be in the morning service because he's in that older kind of grouping, which is actually perfect because then we'll be able to video it and play it for the second service. And so we're pumped. So yeah, we did the horse trough thing and it was awesome. And I learned that that's why we wear waders, because I'm sitting down on the ground and she splashed. And so I preached that sermon looking like I had wet my pants. And so it was a marvelous day. We'll remember it forever.
That we've all had as pastors of like, I won't go into it, but anyways, but that's great. I think these are the great ideas that we can all just, I don't want to say that everything's on the table, but in reality it is. And this is a way for us to be able to think outside the box, minister and connect those dots and all that. Okay. So we've got just a few minutes left and I want to ask one more question concerning our preaching, because if as pastors and preachers on here, I want us to really think this through, and I want to hear from you guys just quickly. Give me some preaching suggestions. What are you going to do? I don't need sermons, but what are you going to do when you get back together? Are you going to continue in the calendar you've been in? Are you going to do a series on the Rona? Like what is your, and and excuse me for using that terminology, I do not want to take this lightly. So when I say that, but what is your plan and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we've been in a series walking through kind of the covenant, making a major, just showing the big picture. And so right before COVID all happened, I was getting ready to release and roll out a brand new vision that was going to carry us into the future here. And I have some really big shoes to fill here at FBC Cherokee, with Brother Gary McNeil being my predecessor. So we were getting ready to roll out new vision, and then this happened. And I didn't want to do that in the midst of fragmented attendance. And so I've committed to preach through August in this series. that we're doing. And then I feel like this time has created a really, really excellent opportunity to preach vision. And if you have a new vision, to roll that out. If you've had a vision already in place for your church and how do we fulfill the Great Commission, now is the time to bring that back to the forefront, maybe add some tweaks and some adjustments. And so I feel very strongly that preaching the Bible, preaching expositionally, that's my passion, but it's a great opportunity to stop and reflect on the direction, because like we've said and heard so many times, Facts and Trends has said it so many times, we will never go back to the way everything was before. Some things will come back, many things will be different. So now I think is a great time to capitalize on that and really capture the vision. And where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint. So now is the time to put those restraints of vision on and rock forward. That's my opinion.
Cool. Guys?
We on the first Sunday of all of this, we hadn't had any restrictions put in place yet, but it was when everything was kind of taken off. We had just finished one series. We go verse by verse through books of the Bible. So we had just finished one. And so I kind of used that as a chance to really go back and harp on the Great Commission. And I'm ashamed to put this on live TV or whatever this would be called. But I titled the sermon "The Gospel Virus," and was comparing kind of the spread of the coronavirus, from the different countries and so forth, and how you can kind of visualize it to the spread of the early church and so forth, and shared how, it never crossed my mind that we weren't going to be able to have worship. Like that hadn't been on the radar yet. Yeah. And I was sharing, we have to remember that what we do as the Great Commission, it's not contained within these four walls. We go out and we are to spread this gospel everywhere that we can. And now I look back and I was a prophet. But so that was that. And so then we've jumped into Jonah with our church family, and it's kind of been a great. It's easy to preach. It's also easy to kind of shorten. I don't have to get into some of the weeds of 1st and 2nd Timothy that my little heart likes to get into and kind of dig in and spend time with my folks. And so we've shortened some things, due in large part to the temperature outside, so they're not out there when it's 80 something degrees in their car. We've shortened things. We only do 2 or 3 songs. Sermon, I try to get closer to about 20 minutes. And I joked with a friend of mine, because the church that I came from my average was about 50 to 55 minutes. And then I came here, and this church believes it is God's will to be out at noon o'clock. Yeah. Not a minute later. And so shortened the sermons a little more. And then I'm like, God, come on, please, I want to preach. He said, now you just get 2 services. So I just am telling myself, I'm still preaching 50 minutes. It's just the same sermon, and I got an hour break in between. So that's what we've been doing. We'll be continuing in that when we are able to gather together. I've really thought about kind of going back to that text of the gospel virus that we considered, and kind of what have we learned, what are, and kind of a recasting of some of that vision of being very outward focused with our community and our church family members. Now what we've learned and now what we're going to do in the future. So,
Todd, what about you, man? What's your plan?
I like these guys' suggestions. We follow the Christian calendar. So, Ascension Sunday is this coming Sunday. We will be online, and then Pentecost Sunday is the first Sunday in June. It's 31st. Yeah. So we'll hit ordinary time when we get back together. So we're going to kind of play that theme. Hey, this in ordinary times, these sorts of things happen, and so we'll probably try to reach back and capitalize on some of the experiences of the church early and late. I mean, we have a 100-year lesson if we go back and do a little research and find out what churches did 100 years ago in our country or in the world in the face of a pandemic. And then there's certainly a way to point out different periods in church history where things weren't, where we weren't always on the top side of the world. We didn't get to order our days. We didn't get to dictate how life happened to us. And so we'll kind of carry that theme probably through the summer, reaching back like Matt described and talking about the ways this particular experience can be met with with grace, because I think one of the things that's clear is that a virus can be politicized as much as a mask can.
Yeah.
And if we don't do something to undermine that sort of thing, then when we get back together, we want to dispossess someone of the notion that because someone feels like they still need to wear a mask doesn't somehow mean they're a little less spiritual than someone who is convinced that they don't need a mask. And since we do live in Oklahoma and we do love the Second Amendment, I'm just going to remind my packing folks that if you're not afraid, then you can disarm yourself. So, that's
let us know how that goes.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I'll set that up real quick.
They it's either that or I hand them a mask. So
there you go. That's right. Yeah,
that's how that works. So but I think that's really, we're going to try to maintain that.
Yeah. Joe, what's your plan at First Baptist Lawton as you're helping them in their transition time?
Well, I had a plan, but after listening to Todd, I think I'm going to be a week behind Todd. Whatever he does, I'm going to do the next Sunday. It'll be easier, less effort, and better preaching. Yeah.
Amen.
Yep.
Listen, I think you alluded to something really interesting, Todd, and I know we're running out of time, but I just to think through, and maybe this is just for further thought, but the fake news crowd runs around strong. There's all these things being shared. And, I explained to a guy yesterday in my community, hey, we can either respond in immense stupidity or immense fear. But God calls us to respond with faith and wisdom. And we need to always put that in the forefront of our people's minds that, just because the Facebook says if you wear a mask, you're afraid, that doesn't mean that's the case. And just because the Facebook says, if you're out and about in the community and you're going back to work and you're going into Walmart and you're going to the grocery store, then you're an idiot. Okay, that isn't the case. This is in the same way. We just have to operate out of faith and wisdom, and seek the Lord and continue to help our people to see that that rhetoric, immense stupidity, immense fear, it's just not biblical. It's just not. And we as believers are called to a higher calling. And because of that, it should drive what we post, how we speak, and how we respond to people. Am I right, guys?
Very much, very much.
Yeah.
No, thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Gotta be one. Gentlemen, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on today. I know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you. Many of you are, all of you attendees, you guys are coming back online soon, if not already, and we're all working through this together. I want to just share with you, go to pastorshelpingpastors.com. You can join in the network of Oklahoma Pastor Renewal. We're not selling anything. We're not experts. We're just pastors trying to help other pastors move forward. So if you haven't done that, you can go over, request membership. It's free. In that, we just share some resources. I also want to say on Tuesday, and the event tickets will go live after this event. On Tuesday, we're at Oklahoma Pastor Renewal in partnership with Youth Ministry Booster, Lifeway students, Oklahoma Baptist, Oklahoma Pastor Renewal, OBU, Hobbs College of Theology and Ministry. We're going to be hosting a webinar on re-engage, and we're going to talk about how we can engage students and children in an effective and efficient way. So one of the things that we'll have there, we have Todd Sanders, newly crowned, what's the word? Dr. Todd Sanders. I don't know if crown is the right word, but Dr. Todd Sanders, who is the youth ministry specialist partner at Oklahoma Baptist, will be with us. Zach Workin, who is with Lifeway Students and Youth Ministry Booster. Mike Luster, pastor of First Baptist Church of Minko, and then Barry Williams with Child Evangelism Fellowship. They're going to be on Tuesday at 11 a.m. Here's what we're telling you. Get your children's minister, get your youth minister, you as a pastor, sit down as a staff or social distance as a staff, watch the webinar. There are going to be a lot of things. We're going to talk about how to minister this summer safely and effectively without having camp or camp alternatives, things of that nature. When do you come back online? When do you come back in the building for your youth and children's ministry? So if you're interested, you can go to the Eventbrite at oklahomapastorrenewal.eventbrite.com, and you'll be able to sign up for that webinar Tuesday, 11 a.m. Central Time. Guys, Can't tell you how much I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on. Don't forget, you can find these guys in their churches on Twitter, on the Facebook, on the Instagram, and many other places. But we appreciate you, gentlemen, coming on and giving your time this morning. So, fellas, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.